Hi, welcome to Reddit Readings. Today we are on AskReddit and listening to the darkest things that happened in secluded towns. Reddit Readings, Episode 17. Redditors who live in secluded towns. What is the darkest thing that happened in your town but is kept secret? When my mom was growing up, a teacher and his wife were killed by an axe murderer. Someone broke into their house and killed them in the middle of the night. They found the husband in the house and the wife in the woods behind it, indicating that she tried to escape and was chased down. Really gruesome stuff. The attack was seemingly random, and they never caught the person responsible. My elementary school was named after the teacher, which wouldn't necessarily be morbid except for the fact that there was a dedication plaque that mentioned his murder. In an elementary school, the 90s were fucking wild. Well, we had the 32-year-old son of a prominent member of town rape and sodomize a 14-year-old girl. Notable quotes from the kangaroo court. She was begging for it. You see the tits on that one? How was I supposed to know? She didn't try real hard to stop anything. Anyways, he got off with a slap on the wrist. 2 weeks later, he was found by cleaning staff in the local gym, beaten with a wooden broom handle shoved up his ass. Rumor was that it was a group of guys from the high school that jumped him after another chick lured him there. Honestly, a lot of people know who did it, but no one breathed a word. He survived, but left the area and basically just disappeared. A family friend was super drunk. He was walking home and fell unconscious on the road at the bottom of a hill. Another family friend, small town so we all knew each other, was driving home late. He heard a thump and a crunch when he went over a hill. He got out of the car thinking he hit a wallaby or something. He instead found his friend dead. Everyone decided to forget what he did, because it really wasn't his fault. There was no way he could have seen him asleep at the bottom on the hill in the middle of the road. It was at such an angle that the headlights didn't spot him. It's a bit weird this has come up because I drove past a super drunk dude just a few hours ago on my way home from work. He was drunk and stumbling on the road. He fell over and lost a thong. Flip-flop to you Americans. I called the police and told them. They said they'd pick him up and take him home where he would be safe. Didn't want a repeat of what happened back in my hometown to happen to that random drunk guy. A father held his wife at gunpoint and threatened to shoot her in the head in front of their 7-year-old daughter. Went on a wild police chase. He still lives in the town. There also was another dad who abused his wife and their children. Still lives here as well. I returned home from school one day to a very powerful smell of gasoline throughout my neighborhood and every emergency responder our town had. It was later found that a father of 3 little girls, who wasn't living there, tucked all 3 girls into bed and slit their throats. He gained access to the house by dismissing the babysitter. He then tried to blow the place up by flooding the basement with gasoline and calling the mom telling her come home, I've hurt the girls. Thankfully the mom went to authorities instead. If he was successful, my house would have blown as well. The father turned himself in and has been in prison ever since. The daughters were memorialized with a playground and the house has been torn down. I'm not sure what happened to the mom but I've heard here and there that she has found peace in a new town. Over the summer there was a guy found hanging from a tree on the sheriff's property. The sheriff disliked this young man and treated him poorly during his incarceration at the county jail. Many witnesses said that the day he got released from jail, the sheriff invited him to his secluded property and told him he could help him get back on his feet. 2 days later, a couple of teenage boys fishing in a creek discovered the guy hanging in a tree. Authorities was notified. No investigation was done, and it was immediately ruled a suicide. This boy was a known drug addict with no family or friends, so there was really no one to press the issue. The local news wrote a small article on man found dead from apparent suicide, and then it was hush hush after that. It's just one of those things we will never know. It's still happening in my town. This specific event happened directly in my gated neighborhood. A member of a Russian gang got his house shot up before they went inside to finish the job. My wife saw them drag out the body. Organized crime bosses live in my town and the 2 neighboring towns. I live in New Jersey. The daughter of divorced parents was raped to death by the mother's boyfriend. She was 6. Her father was contacting CPS and presenting evidence that the man was abusing his daughter under her mother's care. Nothing was done about it until she was life-flighted to Salt Lake, where she died of her wounds, and early in the investigation the mother admitted to letting her boyfriend play with her. The worst part is that because the abuser murderer was part of the tribe, all he had to do was stay on tribal lands to not be taken into custody. So while the long process of an FBI investigation and the FBI jumping the correct hoops to make an arrest on tribal land, this man walked freely as long as he was on the reservation. Most people rejected the abuser murderer entirely, but what hurt more is seeing the people who went out of their way to help him. His family tried to open a food truck where the highway passes through the res so he could have a job. It earned a large protest considering the size of the town and few out-of-towners stopped for tacos, so they fortunately had to shut down. The man's cousin was chief, so he was given a job in the dispensary. Some other members of the tribe who worked there walked out on the job and went to the council to try and stop it. Fortunately, as of now, the FBI has taken the mother and boyfriend into custody and they're awaiting trial. I've been called for jury duty twice now and it's been cancelled each time. I wouldn't say that it's kept secret, but it's so horrific no one really wants to bring it up. A young, early 20s, mentally challenged woman was out with a male family friend and his friend who were a little younger, I think 18 and 19 at the time. They picked her up and drove her to the woods where they repeatedly stabbed her and then lit her on fire while she was still alive. If that wasn't awful enough, they went back to reburn her body a few days later. She had rejected advances that they were making on her. Her body was found by hikers a few days after she was killed, and a few weeks later both boys were arrested. Both of them plead guilty, but offered no reason for why they did what they did. My mom told me this story once that back when she was growing up in a small farming community in Ohio, there was some kind of neighborhood party attended by a bunch of families with kids all around the same age. All the kids, including herself, had this like big slumber party in the basement. They wake up the next morning and one of the kids is found in the middle of the road, having been hit with a truck, but with his whole body zipped all the way up in his sleeping bag. None of the kids owned up to doing it. The adults could never figure it out either. After a while people just started moving on with their lives and everyone pretty much forgot about it. In Mom's seaside hometown, there's a decommissioned lighthouse offshore. Even though utilities to the lighthouse have long been disconnected and the building locked, residents have noticed the beacon turn on at late hours of the night, just for a few minutes, then mysteriously grow dark again. It happens so infrequently that the time of illumination can't be predicted. As I once described here, no one has figured out how or why this happens. Coal mine country PA. Lots of stuff happens. Guy was molesting his daughter and her friend. Went to jail for a few years. When he came back, his house mysteriously burnt to the ground with him in it. Another guy got caught selling crack to a couple of local kids. Yes, I'm that old. He was found in the middle of the street having been run over by a large vehicle repeatedly. A woman stole some jewelry from her elderly neighbor. She lost her hand in an unknown accident. Guy beat his wife. He left town with 2 hands that were destroyed by a ball-peen hammer. Teenage girl killed another girl's dog over a boyfriend. Now she sports a nasty scar across her face and is missing an eye. That and lots of smaller stuff. Justice is handled locally. Small town of about 2,000 to 2,500 in the Midwest, when suddenly about 1/4 of the population just up and left. No word, no nothing. None of them had kids or extended family and none of the papers said anything about it. This was back in maybe the late 80s. This happened when I was pretty young, but I just remember one day one of my teachers wasn't there, and I found out from my parents a ton of people had just left overnight. Most personal belongings were taken with them, but mattresses and furniture was still in their houses. I still have no clue what that was about, and when I've asked my parents more recently they said the rumor around town was that all those people worked for the CIA or FBI and were reassigned all of a sudden. A cop was a child molester and it was widely known. He went with a group hunting in the woods and never came back. In the 80s and early 90s my town was run completely by dirty cops. Drugs were run by the cops and people who didn't do as they were told would go mysteriously missing and eventually, most of them, wind up dead. It took the feds to clean the place up and install a new set of clean cops. The doctor who tried all these wacky treatments to save his young patient from tuberculosis and became infatuated with her. After she died he eventually robbed her grave. mummified her and lived with her body for 7 years before being found out. Did not go to jail and lived his years out in town, I believe. My partner's family has a lot of farmland in a small, rural US community. Back in the 1970s, they went out to check on the cows and 3 of them had been killed overnight, but in a very weird way. They were totally drained of blood and their eyes, ears, tongues, and genitals had been meticulously, surgically, removed. Each of the bodies were laying in the middle of a large indent in the ground, like they had been dropped from a high height. The marks on the carcasses and land were totally inconsistent with any animal attacks the family had seen before. The only explanation they could come up with was some sort of cult or an alien abduction. No one in the family wanted to talk about it because they were afraid of being branded as the town alien nuts. At the time, they managed to quietly inform the sheriff about the cattle slaughter, and they ended up talking to the FBI about it. Turns out there's been widespread reports of cattle deaths like this in the rural US since the 1970s, but no one has figured out the exact cause. No one talks about it to this day. My partner and I actually just learned about this from his mother recently and we looked into it. We're both skeptical, evidence needing people, so we tracked down the now publicly available FBI files as well as newspaper articles from the time. There's still no satisfactory explanation for the hundreds of cattle deaths that have occurred across the rural US. There was even a new case in Oregon as recent as this past summer. I lived in a town of like 5,000. The only secret is the whole system is corrupt. One police officer got caught stealing painkillers. Basically got a reduced and deferred misdemeanor, so in like 3 months it was off his record and back to being a cop. A cop's son lost it one night. Got in a fight with his girlfriend at the bar. My best friend was the bartender and kicked him out. 20 minutes later he is outside putting holes into the bar with a semi-auto. Amazingly nobody got hit. The cop's son also got his charges reduced from basically attempted mass shooting to discharging a firearm within city limits. I don't think that's even a misdemeanor, there's so much more. But the gist is corrupt people run the paper, the police station and the court. If you're in this circle you can do whatever you want, and if you're me you will get sentenced to 1 year in prison for 1 gram of weed. I got the fuck out like 10 years ago. Nothing with me, but when my mom was a kid she lived near a state park in New Hampshire. It's called Bear Brook. In the 80s multiple dismembered body parts were found in a blue barrel. An investigation happened but the killer was never found. In the early 2000s another barrel was found, dating back to the time of the first barrel. The killer was recently found. His name was Robert Evans. The park is in Allenstown if you want to look it up. Probably that old guy who had like 8 children, sexually assaulted 2 of his daughters, raped his stepdaughter multiple times, getting her pregnant and completely mentally impaired in the process. Also mentally and physically abusing the rest of his family, letting one of his sons die from pneumonia because he refused him any treatment. In the end he tried to force his wife to buy him the way out of prison. Ask anyone outside of my town and they will have never heard of him. But I remember him pretty clearly since I was also friends with one of his sons my age and almost the entirety of the rest of the family. I was at their house pretty often when I was younger, until my parents forbid me from going there again. Because how I later found out around that time the first accusations became public since one of his daughters had moved out and reported everything to the police. The Garnerville Pits Massacre. Multiple women murdered at a remote swimming area in an old abandoned quarry. One girl survived but the killer was never identified. Not long later a woman was found dead in a storage shed owned by the sheriff at the time. They arrested a black man who was from out of town with no connections to the woman and sentenced him to life. It later came out that the sheriff had been having an affair with the woman but charges were never filed. Some speculate that the sheriff could be responsible for multiple murders including the bloody Garnerville Pits Massacre. Not far from where my parents grew up is the town of Skidmore, which is honestly a supremely fucked up place of weird sinister stuff. The most commonly known incident is from the 1980s, when Ken McElroy was shot to death while sitting in his truck with his wife, in front of the pool hall in town in broad daylight. There were dozens of witnesses who saw the shooting which came from multiple firearms, but they denied seeing the shooting or whom may have been responsible. The news stories from the time sort of painted McElroy as a town bully, almost like Biff from Back to the Future, except he was a fucking violent monster who had beaten, figuratively and literally, over a dozen charges, including theft, rape of a minor. Remember his wife? Yep, she was one of the known rape victims and carried Ken's child at 14, and other general violent acts. Leading up to his town-sanctioned execution, he had the gall to appeal a 2-year sentence for shooting a geriatric grocer in the neck with a shotgun, and nearly decapitated him. So, why did he do it? Because the grocer asked Ken's daughter to put back a piece of candy she hadn't paid for. People appeared fed up with this rampaging 6'5", 270-pound thug who thought he could get away with rape and wanton violence. So somebody, or a group of somebodies, shot him at least twice and emptied quite a few rounds into his truck. No witnesses, and even his wife who was in the truck refused to identify the shooters. Not so much a dark secret, but my town houses a bombing range that is still in use. No one has ever met anyone who works on it. No kids at school ever parents who work there. We never see planes or anything, but there is a guard at the gate. What was truly odd is that if you ask a resident about it, we all say the same thing. Oh, the bombing range. There's nothing out there. Several young boys, age 9 to 11, went missing in the village, and it was suspected that a group of boys from the same school were responsible. They were heard talking about it on 2 occasions, about how they kill whoever they don't like. However, their parents apparently attested that they never let them out of sight outside of school hours. This group of kids was known for skipping school to sniff glue and drink alcohol, by the way, but their parents obviously denied it. Only one of the 6 missing kids was ever found, in a creek, with injuries like he was stoned to death. Police said he fell down the creek accidentally, though. This was about 20 years ago in Europe. I wouldn't say we live in a secluded town, but when my mother was in school, her best friend got a job working for the sheriff. She later came to school and told them that the sheriff had been molesting her. She also began telling people about what they have been using the tunnels under the town for. The police supposedly had been filming child pornography. After that day, she never made it home. She was found later naked, hog-tied and shot in the back of the head. No one could prove it, and the sheriff had been suspected of many things, but nothing ever came of it. They just announced that there was a man seen in a white van abducting people. But her friends knew. Her family knows. This is Red Bluff, California, by the way. The tunnels were originally used by Chinese immigrants. They go through our main street and through Rio Street. They led to houses and some businesses, but they have been condemned. There are sensors down there though, so if you get in, the police are right there to get you out. In the early 1990s, a town in my small county in the southern US had a fire in a chicken processing plant. When workers tried to escape, it became apparent that the fire exits and other exits had been locked. Dozens of people died around the exits in desperation in a town of around 2,000. Our state suppressed the investigation due to lobbies, and families received almost none of the compensation funds. Pretty sure there's a song about it. It's not really kept a secret, but a pyramid scheme has been going on for several years. The dude was caught about 2 years ago and taken to trial. He bribed the jury. He was set for a retrial, but then something happened with the presidency, not related to the case, and it just didn't happen. Nobody really talks about it. The rate of children being kidnapped seems to be going up also. Nobody will talk about that, either. There's a very wealthy area next to mine. Mansions, millionaires, etc. In one of the houses were leaders of a pedophile ring, and it all was handled very discreetly. No press, just talk of the town. Also, one mother was the one who exposed them with the help of the FBI. A kid also committed suicide in this area too. No press, and a girl rode her bike to a bridge and jumped off. In my own area a long time ago, there was a Satanist church where a few dead bodies were left on the door. It shut down. Then another time, newborn babies were being abandoned in dumpsters. My town isn't very secluded, but I think this still works. So there is this building that used to be a hotel. And one day this guy shows up and he takes multiple trips going in and out with a bunch of equipment. They found him a little while later in his room. He had assembled an entire guillotine and cut his head off. Thank you for listening to Reddit Readings episode 17. And if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing and leaving a rating.